When I married Sophia, I thought I had found my forever. She was 22, vibrant, and full of dreams about making a mark in the world through her university education. I was 28, already established in my career, and head over heels in love with her fiery ambition. She had insisted on pursuing her degree after we got married, and I was more than happy to support her. After all, love is about growing together, and her happiness was mine. Sophia had chosen to study literature at a nearby university, a place I had fond memories of attending with my twin brothers, Ethan and Evan. The twins, just a year younger than me, were still pursuing their postgraduate studies there in sports science and psychology, respectively. They were the golden boys of the campus, charming, athletic, and with a magnetic charisma that drew people to them. At first, I was thrilled at the idea of Sophia having them around. I imagined they'd look out for her, ensuring she had a support system on campus. Ethan and Evan had always been close to me, and we'd shared everything growing up, from birthdays to secrets. It seemed fitting that Sophia would become a part of that bond too. But sometimes, what feels like a perfect alignment of stars can carry shadows you don't see until it's too late. Sophia began her studies with enthusiasm, often coming home excited about her classes and new friends. She'd occasionally mention the twins in her stories, how Ethan had helped her figure out the gym equipment, or how Evan had shared his notes from a psychology lecture she'd attended out of curiosity. I didn't think much of it. I was glad they were around for her. Still, I couldn't ignore the subtle shifts. She seemed a little more preoccupied than usual, her phone always by her side. She'd started staying late at the university, citing group projects or library sessions. I dismissed my unease, chalking it up to the demands of her coursework. Sophia had always been independent and driven. Who was I to doubt her? The twins, for their part, didn't act any differently around me. Ethan was his usual jokester self, teasing me about getting soft now that I was married. Evan was quieter, but his sharp wit and charm were ever present. When they visited, it felt like old times, and I didn't question their bond with Sophia. Looking back, I realized I had been blind. Not because the signs weren't there, but because I couldn't imagine betrayal from two people I had trusted all my life, and the woman I loved. As weeks turned into months, Sophia's world at university seemed to grow while ours at home began to shrink. She spoke more about her classes, her professors, and the campus events. Her laughter at dinner felt brighter, but it wasn't always directed at me. The twins, Ethan and Evan, became recurring characters in her stories. "Ethan is hilarious," she said one night, her face lit with amusement. He tried to convince the entire class that Hemingway's writing was overrated, just to see if anyone would agree with him. It almost turned into a debate. I chuckled, though a small pang of jealousy surfaced. That sounds like him, always stirring the pot. "And Evan," she added, "he's so insightful. He helped me dissect that tricky Emily Dickinson poem. You should have seen the way he broke it down. It was amazing." I nodded, trying to feel pride rather than discomfort. It wasn't unusual for Sophia to be close with the twins. They were family, after all, but a nagging thought lingered. Why was she suddenly spending so much time with them? My own work kept me busy during the day, and I tried not to let my imagination get the better of me. Still, certain moments stayed with me. Once, I walked into the room to find Sophia on the phone, her voice playful and teasing. She laughed and quickly ended the call when she saw me. "That was Ethan," she said, brushing it off. "He was just asking about an assignment. Couldn't he have called Evan instead?" I asked, half joking. "Well, Ethan's more fun to talk to," she said with a smirk, before changing the subject. I told myself it was nothing. Ethan was always sociable, and Sophia had a knack for forming connections. But small things began to stack up. There were times when I'd come home early, only to find Sophia had already left for the university, hours before her classes began. "I'm meeting Evan to go over some study material," she explained once when I asked. Another time, Ethan dropped by unannounced while she was at home alone. "I was just in the area," he said when I came home and found him there, lounging on the couch with Sophia. They both looked a little startled when I walked in, but I didn't press the issue. I was grateful to see him looking out for her. Yet, the unease persisted. I found myself second-guessing things I would have never questioned before. Her smile seemed different when she mentioned them. There was a lightness in her voice that I couldn't quite place. Still, I shoved the doubts down. What could I possibly have to worry about? These were my brothers. Then came the day Sophia decided to join Ethan at the gym. "He's going to teach me how to do proper deadlifts," she said one evening, practically bouncing with excitement. I tried to hide the twinge of discomfort. "I could show you, you know. I've been working out for years." She waved me off with a laugh. "You're too serious at the gym. Ethan makes it fun." And that was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand but should have seen coming. The bond between them grew while the cracks in our marriage began to widen. So small they were almost invisible, but undeniable once you knew they were there. As Sophia's gym sessions with Ethan became more frequent, I tried to shake the unease gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. Ethan had always been the life of the party, effortlessly charming and approachable. And Sophia? She was just excited to learn something new. Still, the changes were undeniable. She began to spend more time perfecting her appearance, even for simple trips to campus or the gym. She bought new workout clothes, sleek leggings, and fitted tops that highlighted her figure in ways I couldn't ignore. "You're dressing up for the gym now?" I teased one morning as she grabbed her bag. She laughed. "You know how Ethan is. He always has a comment if you look sloppy." I forced a smile. It sounded innocent enough, but her voice carried a tone of excitement I hadn't heard directed at me in months. One weekend, the twins invited us out for a casual dinner. Sophia was particularly animated, cracking jokes and leaning into Ethan's stories with an almost magnetic energy. Evan, quieter by nature, mostly observed with his signature smirk, chiming in occasionally to add a clever remark. I watched the three of them, trying to ignore the sinking feeling that I was becoming an outsider in my own family. That evening, when we returned home, I tried to bring it up. "You've been spending a lot of time with the twins lately," I said, my tone light but probing. She tilted her head, her brows knitting together. "Is that a problem? They're your brothers. Shouldn't you be happy we get along?" "Of course," I said quickly. I feel like I don't see you as much anymore. Between your classes and hanging out with them, it's like we're on different schedules." Her expression softened, and she reached for my hand. "I know it feels that way, but I'm not doing it on purpose. I've just been so busy. And Ethan and Evan make campus life easier. They're familiar faces. I'm sorry if it feels like I've been neglecting you." Her words reassured me, but only for a moment. She kissed me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the warmth of the woman I fell in love with. Still, a voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Something's not right." Over the next few weeks, Sophia's connection with Evan started to emerge in ways that mirrored her bond with Ethan. She began referencing long talks with Evan about life, philosophy, and her struggles with balancing school and home. She even borrowed one of his psychology textbooks, which I found on our coffee table one evening. "He's helping me understand the basics," she explained when I asked about it. "It's fascinating stuff. You should have heard him talk about human behavior and trust. It's mind-blowing." I raised an eyebrow. "Evan's always been the deep thinker. Did he say anything about you trusting me?" I asked, attempting a joke. She chuckled but didn't answer directly. "He's just really insightful. You know how he is." I couldn't help but notice how she seemed to light up when she talked about either of them. At times, it felt as though the twins had become more central to her life than I was. I pushed the thoughts aside, chalking them up to jealousy. After all, they were family. What harm could there be in her feeling close to them? But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was brewing, something that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my family. Sophia's presence at home became less and less frequent as the semester went on. Between her classes, study groups, and gym sessions, I often found myself eating dinner alone. When she was home, she seemed distracted, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. She'd laugh at messages she didn't share or disappear into the other room for calls she claimed were about group projects. It wasn't as though we were fighting or unhappy, but there was a growing distance between us that I couldn't ignore. She was still affectionate, but it felt rehearsed, like she was going through the motions. The lightness, the ease of our earlier days had been replaced by something heavy, something neither of us dared to name. One evening, after she came home late, I decided to ask directly. Are we okay? I asked as she slipped off her shoes. She paused, her brow furrowing. Of course we are. Why would you even ask that? I don't know, I said, hesitating. You just seem preoccupied lately, like your mind's somewhere else. She sighed and stepped closer to me, her hands resting on my shoulders. I'm just trying to juggle a lot right now. School, deadlines, new people. It's overwhelming sometimes. But it has nothing to do with us, okay? Her words were convincing, but her eyes didn't meet mine as she said them. The twins, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying the best phase of their lives. They talked about Sophia constantly when we spoke, how she was thriving on campus, how she was an enthusiastic workout partner, and how she brought a fresh energy to their routines. Man, she crushed her deadlift goal today, Ethan told me one evening over the phone. She's got insane focus. She's a quick learner, Evan added when I ran into him a few days later. She absorbs everything like a sponge. Their admiration for her felt genuine, but I couldn't help noticing how often she came up in conversation, as though she'd become a centerpiece of their lives, too. It was hard to reconcile the adoration in their voices with the growing emptiness I felt at home. One Friday night, I decided to surprise Sophia. She had texted earlier to say she'd be staying late at the library to finish a paper. Wanting to support her, I swung by a cafe and picked up her favorite coffee and a pastry. But when I arrived at the library, she wasn't there. I walked the aisles, my eyes scanning for her familiar silhouette. After a few minutes, I decided to text her. Hey, I'm at the library. Thought you could use a coffee break. The dots indicating she was typing appeared almost immediately. Oh no, I just left. Heading home now. Sorry, babe. Rain check? I stared at the message, my chest tightening. If she wasn't here, where had she been? A part of me wanted to demand answers, but another part, the part that didn't want to seem controlling, told me to let it go. I drove home, the coffee untouched on the passenger seat, and waited for her. She arrived an hour later, flushed and cheerful, as though nothing was amiss. You're back late, I said casually as she kicked off her shoes. Yeah, we lost track of time, she replied. What a day. I'm starving. Want to order takeout? I nodded, suppressing my urge to push further. That night, as we ate dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important was slipping through my fingers. In the weeks that followed, the pieces started coming together in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. The laughter Sophia shared with Ethan, the lingering looks she gave Evan during family dinners, the way they seemed to have inside jokes I wasn't privy to. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but deep down, I knew the truth was far more complicated and painful than I was ready to admit. The unease that had been simmering within me finally began to boil over. Every little detail, every fleeting moment that seemed slightly out of place, started to connect into something larger, something I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just my imagination, paranoia fueled by loneliness and stress. But the doubts refused to be silenced. One evening, as I was cleaning the living room, I came across Sophia's gym bag. She had left it by the couch, unzipped. I wasn't proud of the impulse, but I found myself reaching inside, my heart pounding as I rummaged through the contents. Sneakers, a water bottle, a towel, and then a small slip of paper folded neatly. I unfolded it slowly, my breath hitching. It was a receipt for a smoothie bar near campus. The date and time on it didn't match up with her supposed schedule. She told me she was at a study session with her classmates that evening. My chest tightened. This wasn't proof of anything, not really. People grab drinks, people change plans. But why hadn't she mentioned it? Why was this small detail nagging at me, demanding attention? The twins were no help in easing my growing suspicions. Their interactions with Sophia seemed perfectly normal to the outside world. But to me, there were subtleties that struck a nerve. Ethan's playful teasing felt more intimate than it should. Evan's quiet attentiveness toward her seemed deeper than simple kindness. One Sunday, we all gathered for a barbecue at my parents' house. Watching the three of them together was like observing a world I no longer belonged to. Ethan flipped burgers on the grill, joking with Sophia as she stood beside him, a bottle of beer in her hand. Evan sat nearby, his eyes fixed on her as she laughed at one of Ethan's exaggerated stories. "You've got some competition," my father joked, clapping me on the back as he motioned toward the trio. "Those two can't get enough of her." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, she fits right in." But inside, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I wasn't sure who I was more upset with, my brothers for drawing her in, or Sophia for letting herself be drawn. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, even if I wasn't entirely sure what questions to ask. While Sophia was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. My hands shook as I unlocked it using the password I had known for years. The messages between her and the twins were casual at first glance. Inside jokes, memes, and brief updates about their plans on campus. But some stood out. From Ethan, "You're looking stronger every week. I bet you'll pass me soon." From Evan, "Can't wait for our next session. You're so easy to talk to." What struck me most wasn't the words themselves but the tone, the familiarity, the subtle undercurrent of intimacy. It was the kind of warmth I hadn't felt from her in months. I stared at the screen, my thoughts racing. There was nothing concrete here, nothing damning, but it felt wrong. It felt like something was happening beneath the surface, just out of my reach. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the sound of Sophia's steady breathing beside me, wondering how we had gotten to this point. How had I lost her without even realizing it? And why did it feel like the people I trusted most were the ones pulling her away? For the first time, I began to consider the possibility that my worst fears weren't just paranoia. They were real, and I was running out of time to face them. The unease was beginning to consume me. Every moment Sophia spent away from me felt like an unanswered question. Every laugh she shared with Ethan, every glance from Evan, every vague explanation for her late nights, they all became puzzle pieces in a picture I didn't want to see. But I couldn't bring myself to confront her. What if I was wrong? What if my insecurities were twisting innocent interactions into something sinister? The risk of being wrong terrified me almost as much as the risk of being right. One evening, I decided to observe instead of question. Sophia had told me she'd be at the university late to work on a group project. The explanation was familiar now, almost routine. After she left, I grabbed my keys and decided to drive to campus, needing to reassure myself that her words matched her actions. When I arrived, I parked at a distance and scanned the campus buildings. Groups of students milled about, their chatter blending into the hum of the evening. Then I spotted her. She wasn't in the library or a study room. She was outside, standing near the gym entrance. With her were Ethan and Evan. The three of them were laughing, their postures relaxed. Ethan said something that made Sophia playfully shove his arm, while Evan handed her a water bottle with a small smile. It was an ordinary moment, but something about it felt off, too comfortable, too familiar. I clenched the steering wheel, debating whether to approach them. But before I could decide, they walked inside together, disappearing from view. I stayed in the car for another 20 minutes, staring at the gym entrance, before driving home in silence. Sophia returned late that night, her hair damp from a shower and her cheeks flushed. "Sorry I'm late," she said, leaning down to kiss me. The project ran longer than expected. I forced a smile. "No problem. Did you get a lot done?" "Yeah," she said quickly, heading toward the bedroom. "It's coming together." I stared after her, the weight in my chest growing heavier with every lie. Over the next few days, I couldn't focus. I barely slept, my mind replaying every suspicious moment, every unexplained absence. I started paying closer attention to her habits. She was more protective of her phone than ever, keeping it on silent and face down. She'd grown increasingly evasive when I asked about her day, offering vague details that felt rehearsed. The twins didn't make it any easier. Ethan's teasing had taken on an edge, his jokes landing too close to home. "You've got to let Sophia breathe a little," he said one evening when we were all at dinner. "She's got a life outside of you, you know." Evan, as usual, was quieter, but his subtle smirks when Sophia spoke grated on me. It was as though he knew something I didn't, as though they both did. The breaking point came one Friday night. Sophia had left early for the university, claiming she had a study session that would last well into the evening. Around 9 p.m., I received a message from a friend who worked near campus. Saw Sophia earlier with your brothers at the sidewalk cafe. Looked like they were having a good time. Was it a family thing? I felt my stomach drop. Sophia hadn't mentioned anything about the cafe. And why were Ethan and Evan there with her? I texted back casually. Thanks for letting me know. It must have been last minute. But I knew better. This wasn't last minute. It was something hidden, something meant to stay out of sight. That night, when Sophia returned home, I didn't say a word. I watched as she brushed off the evening with a brief explanation about group projects and deadlines. And as I lay awake beside her, I knew I was done ignoring the signs. Whatever they were hiding, it was time to uncover the truth. The tension in my chest felt like a vice as I began to prepare myself for what I might find. Ignoring the warning signs had brought me nothing but sleepless nights and growing doubt. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. The opportunity presented itself one Thursday evening when Sophia left for another group study session. I'd made sure to leave work early, and as soon as she was gone, I began to act. I started by checking the app connected to our shared car tracking system. The feature was something we had installed for convenience, but now it felt like a lifeline to answers. Within minutes, her location pinged, not at the university but at a boutique hotel just outside of town. My heart sank. I drove to the location, each mile filled with a sense of dread. When I arrived, I parked a safe distance away and waited, watching the entrance. The minutes dragged on like hours. Finally, I saw her. Sophia stepped out of the car, and she wasn't alone. Ethan was with her, his hand resting casually on her lower back. Moments later, Evan emerged from the other side, laughing at something Sophia said. The three of them walked inside together, their movements easy and unhurried, as if this were routine. My stomach churned. My worst fears suddenly given form. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with a million questions, but only one truly mattered. Why? Why had she done this to me? Why had they? The realization that I needed proof jolted me into action. I stepped out of the car, my phone gripped tightly in my hand, and walked toward the hotel. The receptionist glanced at me as I entered, but I quickly slipped past toward the elevator. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned the screen displaying the floors, noting which ones were currently occupied. I had to take a risk. With a deep breath, I pressed the button for the third floor. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, and when the doors opened, I stepped into a quiet hallway lined with doors. I listened carefully, walking slowly, until faint laughter reached my ears. I stopped in front of one of the rooms, my heart pounding. The laughter was unmistakable, Sophia's, bright and carefree, mixed with Ethan's boisterous chuckle and Evan's quieter hum of amusement. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but the sounds left no room for doubt. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, activating the camera. I knocked on the door, my knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. The laughter stopped. There was a brief pause, followed by muffled movement. The door opened, and there she was. Sophia stood before me, her face drained of color, her lips parting in shock. Behind her, Ethan and Evan froze mid-movement, their expressions a mix of surprise and guilt. Care to explain what's going on? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I lifted my phone, the camera still recording. Sophia stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Ethan stepped forward, his hands raised as if to defuse the situation. It's not what it looks like, he began. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because it looks like my wife and my brothers are having the time of their lives in a hotel room. Enlighten me, Ethan. What is it then? Silence filled the room. Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears, but I didn't care. The betrayal, raw and unfiltered, had already cut deeper than anything she could say. I turned and walked away, ignoring their pleas and explanations. My world had already crumbled, and nothing they said could undo it. The car ride home was a blur. My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I wasn't just betrayed by my wife. I was betrayed by the two people I had trusted most in the world. The weight of it all threatened to crush me, but one thing became clear. I couldn't let this go unanswered. I sat in the living room that night, The lights dimmed, and the house eerily silent. My thoughts churned, alternating between disbelief, anger, and a hollow ache I couldn't shake. I stared at the door, waiting for Sophia to return, knowing she would have to face me eventually. When the door finally creaked open, Sophia stepped inside hesitantly, her keys jangling in her trembling hand. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She froze when she saw me sitting there, my phone resting on the coffee table in front of me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and even. "Please," she whispered, stepping closer. "I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, cutting her off. "Explain how my wife of 2 years is sneaking around with my own brothers? Explain why I had to follow you to a hotel to see the truth with my own eyes. Explain that, Sophia." Her lip quivered, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear. It just got out of control." I laughed bitterly. "Out of control? So it was an accident, then? You tripped and fell into their beds? Is that it?" "It wasn't like that," she pleaded, sinking to her knees in front of me. "I was lonely, and she stopped herself, realizing how hollow her excuses sounded. "They what, Sophia?" I asked, leaning forward. "They filled the void I couldn't? Was I not enough for you? Were you bored? Tell me." Her silence was deafening. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I stood, towering over her. "You've destroyed everything, Sophia. You didn't just betray me. You ruined my family. My brothers, my own blood. Do you even realize what you've done?" "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I know I've hurt you, but I still love you. Please, let's talk this through. We can fix this." I shook my head, my voice filled with venom. "You think love is enough to fix this? You think we can just move on like nothing happened? You've killed whatever we had, Sophia. And the worst part? You didn't just break my heart. You shattered my trust in everything I believed in." I walked past her, heading toward the bedroom to pack an overnight bag. Her cries followed me down the hall, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't bear to look at her. As I grabbed my things, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "We need to talk. I know you're angry, but it's not what you think." "Not what I think." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. How could they possibly try to spin this? Did they think I was so naive, so blind, that I'd buy into whatever story they crafted? I left the house that night, slamming the door behind me as Sophia's sobs echoed in the background. I drove aimlessly for hours, the betrayal replaying in my mind like a broken record. When I finally stopped, parked on a quiet street, I realized something. Anger wasn't enough. This wasn't going to end with tears or apologies. They had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. It was time to make them pay. The betrayal burned like an unquenchable fire, and I channeled all my hurt and anger into a singular purpose, making them feel the weight of what they'd done. Sophia's tears, Ethan's hollow words, and Evan's complicit silence. They would all pay for shattering my trust. I began methodically. If they wanted to destroy my life, I would dismantle theirs, piece by piece. The first step was gathering more evidence. I needed to know the full extent of their betrayal, not just for my own satisfaction, but to ensure they couldn't squirm out of the truth. I reached out to a private investigator the next day, a professional who came highly recommended. "I need you to focus on 3 people," I said, sliding photos of Sophia, Ethan, and Evan across the desk. "I want to know everything, where they go, who they meet, and how long this has been going on. Spare me no detail." The investigator nodded, his expression grim. "Understood. I'll get started immediately." In the meantime, I began setting traps of my own. I knew Ethan and Evan well, how they thought, what made them tick, and, most importantly, their weaknesses. Ethan, with his brash confidence, was prone to oversharing, especially when he thought he was untouchable. Evan, on the other hand, kept his cards close to his chest, but his need to maintain a polished image was his Achilles heel. It didn't take long for the investigator to deliver results. Within a week, I had a damning portfolio of photos, text messages, and time-stamped logs that detailed their encounters. The affair had been going on for months, since shortly after Sophia started at the university, there were clandestine meetups at the gym, hours spent together in empty classrooms, and regular visits to that boutique hotel. The most damning revelation? They hadn't even tried to hide it in their messages. From Ethan, "Tonight was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." From Evan, "I love how alive you make me feel. I wish we didn't have to hide this." Sophia had responded to both of them with equal enthusiasm, her words laced with promises and affection that once belonged to me. It was sickening, but it also solidified my resolve. With the evidence in hand, I began phase 2. I sent anonymous packages to key people in their lives, carefully curated envelopes containing just enough proof to raise questions but not outright accusations. Ethan's coaching peers at the university received photos of him and Sophia entering the hotel with a note. "Is this who you trust with your team?" Evan's department head received emails and text screenshots, highlighting his special relationship with a married woman. For Sophia, I reached out to her academic advisor, including photos and logs of her absences, framing them as potential academic misconduct. The fallout began almost immediately. Ethan called me the day after his boss confronted him. His voice was frantic. "What the hell did you do, man? I've been suspended from coaching pending an investigation." I smiled bitterly. That's what happens when you prioritize screwing your brother's wife over your career. "Come on, we can fix this," he pleaded. "We're family." "Family?" I snapped. "You stopped being my brother the moment you crossed that line. Don't call me again." Evan, predictably, didn't call, but I heard through mutual contacts that his reputation was in shambles. His department had launched a formal inquiry into his conduct, and whispers of his indiscretions had begun circulating among his peers. The golden image he'd worked so hard to cultivate was tarnished beyond repair. Sophia was no better off. Her advisor called her in for a meeting, questioning her sudden drop in attendance and her rumored relationship with my brothers. When she came home that evening, her face was pale, and her eyes brimmed with desperation. "You're doing this, aren't you?" she accused, her voice shaking. "You're trying to ruin my life." "Funny," I said coldly. "That's exactly what you did to me." By the end of the week, the three of them were left scrambling to pick up the pieces. The fallout was brutal, but I felt no remorse. They had torn my life apart, and I had simply returned the favor. But I wasn't done yet. The final blow was still to come, a revelation that would leave them reeling in ways they couldn't anticipate. The fallout had left Sophia, Ethan, and Evan grasping at the tattered remains of their reputations, but I wasn't finished. The devastation I'd orchestrated was only the beginning. There was still one card left to play, one that would ensure they could never escape the consequences of their actions. I planned it meticulously, ensuring that my final move would expose them fully and leave no room for excuses. It came together on a quiet Sunday evening when the three of them were set to meet at our parents' house for what I imagined was a desperate attempt to strategize their way out of the mess they had created. I arrived before any of them, sitting with my parents in the living room. They had been in the dark about everything until now, but that was about to change. "Is something wrong?" my mother asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, "but it's something you both need to see." I handed them a USB drive. "Play it," I said simply. My father plugged it into the TV, and the room fell silent as the screen filled with damning images and videos. Sophia entering the hotel with Ethan and Evan, intimate moments caught on security footage, and screenshots of their texts and emails. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while my father sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. How could they?" my mother whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "They did," I said, my tone void of emotion, "and they've been doing it for months." The sound of the front door opening broke the silence. The twins and Sophia walked in, their voices casual and light, but they stopped short when they saw us sitting there. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, his smile fading. I stood and faced them. "What's going on," I said, "is that the lies are over." Sophia's eyes darted to the TV, where the evidence of their betrayal still played in a haunting slideshow. Her face crumpled, and she began to cry. "Please," she whispered, stepping toward me. "I didn't mean for it to." "Don't," I said sharply, raising a hand to stop her. I don't want your excuses. I want you to see what you've done. To me, to this family. Ethan and Evan exchanged nervous glances. Evan, ever the composed one, tried to speak. Look, this is a misunderstanding. We can. Misunderstanding? I interrupted, my voice rising. You both slept with my wife. You lied to me, to everyone. And you call that a misunderstanding? Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but my father's booming voice cut him off. Enough. He stood, his hands trembling with anger. Is it true? He demanded, looking at them. Did you betray your own brother like this? Neither of them could meet his gaze. The silence that followed was deafening. The confrontation was brutal. My parents were devastated, their disbelief quickly turning to anger. My mother, unable to contain her sobs, berated them for destroying the family. My father, stoic and furious, ordered them out of the house. As for Sophia, she tried to plead with me one last time, but I wouldn't let her. There's nothing left to say, I told her. You made your choice, and now you'll live with it. I handed her a folder containing divorce papers, along with a letter detailing the evidence I had gathered. I'll be filing this tomorrow, I said. Don't bother trying to contest it. You'll lose. In the days that followed, the consequences of their actions rippled outward. Ethan was fired from his coaching position, his reputation irreparably damaged. Evan, facing mounting pressure from his department, quietly resigned, his polished image in ruins. Sophia dropped out of university, unable to face the whispers and stares from her peers. As for me, I moved out of the house we once shared and started the process of rebuilding my life. The pain of their betrayal lingered, but so did the satisfaction of knowing they could never escape the truth of what they had done. Months later, I stood on the porch of my new apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The scars of their betrayal were still there, but they were healing. I had faced the worst and emerged stronger. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.